Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the YouTube show and podcast, None of Our Businesses, where we, three accountants, talk about business and world news from an accountant's perspective. Well, actually, three accountants' perspective. I'm Ty Carr, and with me today is Charlie Ziegmund.
Hi, everybody.
And Jack DiMatteo.
Welcome.
And what do we have on deck today? Well, the eviction moratorium. At the time of this recording, we ask, is it on or is it off? Congress did not pass an extension, but it looks like maybe the CDC has done it again. And Robinhood's poor IPO opening, is that a fair metric of the company's performance? E&Y is slapped for violating independence rules with a large public company. More nations are being represented with medals in the Olympics than ever before. And finally, not sure how we feel about this, China going to activate the first clean nuclear reactor? All right, well, we got a lot to get into here. So as always, we would invite people to put their comments, give us a rating, give us a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments if there's anything that we're talking about that you might want us to address differently or new things you might want us to address. We'd love to hear from you. Let's kick this off with Jack.
Okay, first article this week. Should probably come as no surprise to anybody. Congress took off and went home without extending the eviction moratorium. I guess this would kick off the debate about whether or not that moratorium should be extended. It would seem like enough people are back to work. You know, things are starting to pick up. So it would seem like it would be high time. Maybe they're going to do it in the cowardly fashion, take off and just let it expire and not bring it to another vote. But I know in the week after that, a lot of politicians were out there getting some airtime on it and arguing about how this the eviction moratorium should be extended. I know I was out there on Twitter and quite a few landlords were describing some just horrible situations of tenants that they could not evict and they couldn't do a whole heck of a lot about it. So I don't know, based on everything I'm seeing and hearing about the economy, I think it's probably a good thing that this eviction moratorium is lifted. I think it's high time that we start getting back to normal. Was that the take you guys had on this?
I forgot in the pre-show discussion to give you the update that they did extend it. The CDC did. I think they did. I'm just Googling it right now, but it just happened like 2 days ago or something, I think. Let's see. I think what they did was they well, we may cut here, I guess. How do you guys want to play this? Do you want me to explain it live, or do you want?
That's fine, because I think it's a good topic from the standpoint of, should we be extending it, or is it a good idea that we extend it, or is it time for it to expire? So if they've gone ahead and done that, yeah, I think it could just be part of the discussion.
Well, what they did, of course, just adds to the controversial drama. So,
right.
So apparently, they were going back and forth, and the Biden administration was basically telling Congress, "Hey, we don't think that if the CDC does this, it would stand a Supreme Court challenge." But they gave up and went ahead and tried to do an end run around. So what they did was, my understanding of what they did was, they had concluded. The Biden administration legal had concluded that it was unlikely to stand a Supreme Court challenge if they just extended it. So what they did is they ended the old one and they started a new one under a different pretext. So they basically created a whole new, my understanding is the eviction moratorium that they put out there is technically a new eviction moratorium that they're hoping might withstand a Supreme Court challenge, but everyone's expecting that this will get challenged. And so, and I think, and then immediately after doing that, I think what I heard was the Biden administration had sent some kind of note to Pelosi saying, yeah, okay, but we did it, but this is probably, we can brace yourselves because this is probably going to get challenged and could be overturned in the Supreme Court. So I guess we'll see where that goes. But yeah, just making it even more controversial. That's my update to it. If you want my opinion of it, is as somebody who has owned rental properties, it's a scary thing. It really has turned on its head for me in terms the whole concept of rental property investing, residential rental property investing, being a rental property investor, because it feels like a government taking. And it's interesting how quickly uh, this happened, this rush to just demonizing landlords and saying, well, let's just, for lack of a better phrase, let's just screw them. And in order to give relief to the tenants, I get the tenants may need some relief as well, but I mean, that there's been no real effort to create a comprehensive solution that bails out everyone involved, right? So if you're a small landlord, and you're in a situation where your tenants can't pay and they are able to use the eviction moratorium as a reason not to pay, and then you're hoping, the whole theory is that, okay, you get to the end of the eviction moratorium, things are better, and then the tenants magically are going to come up with thousands, if not perhaps tens of thousands of dollars to suddenly pay all this back rent. And we all kind of laugh at that proposition. We know that's highly unlikely at that point. And so then they owe it, they don't pay. So then what happens? Then the renter has a black mark financially, right? Because it becomes record that they didn't pay their rent after the eviction moratorium expires, and they don't pay their rent, and the landlord doesn't get paid. And what's the landlord supposed to do? I mean, during this period of time, it's possible that the landlord, I just got a notice from several banks that the state of Oregon is requiring banks to notify residential property owners that they can get a deferment of their loan payments, right? So that's your first possible solution is that as a landlord or as a rental property owner, perhaps you have some recourse to defer your mortgage payments with the bank in the same way that the renters are supposedly deferring under an eviction moratorium, their rental payments. But you know how this story works out. Like I'm saying, you get to the end of this and the likelihood that the renter actually pays all that back rent is probably not good. Meanwhile, as the landlord, you're on the hook for paying all those back loan payments as a deferment, not an abatement. So you then would somehow have to come up with the funds to pay the banks. And if you don't, then what happens? Well, then you're in financial distress as a small landlord that's not a big corporation that has somehow the funding or the wherewithal to deal with this. And so I will say that I've been fortunate that I haven't had to deal with this problem, but it's kind of made me think from an investor standpoint. Residential rental does not look like a good investment class anymore. And I don't, when you think about that also from a social standpoint, is it a good thing for society or for culture that small investors can't get into residential rental, that the only investors that can be in residential rental are either the wealthy or large corporations that have can bankroll this kind of issue? I don't know if that's really a good thing. I don't know if that's good for society or culture that all of our landlords would be just big corporations or wealthy investors. And so I don't think people are thinking through that. They're just thinking through what's good for them at the moment.
Yeah, I think you've got that exactly right. I mean, everybody wants what's best for the tenants. It's just a question of like at whose expense. Should it be at the expense of private landlords, or should it be at the expense of society as a whole if funded through the form of taxation? And the reason I say that is because the article brought this big point up of that in the background, while all of this is going on, there's undistributed funds that have been set aside and earmarked for aid for issues like this, and then have just not been actually distributed in a way that's meaningful. And so I think it's one thing to look at who should be paying the rent while there's a moratorium, but it's a whole nother discussion if there's aid ready to go that isn't being properly used or utilized. Because if that is the case, then it seems like the right thing to do would be to keep the moratorium in place, which protects the tenants, use the aid to cover the landlords so that they're able to do what they need to do, and so that we're not just transferring wealth due to a reason that really has nothing to do with with the landlord or the tenant individually. And so, yeah, it just seems like better use of government resources is kind of not only the key to solving this issue, but maybe a theme that we've seen throughout this entire pandemic. What do you think, Jack?
No, you guys are pretty well hammered at home. I mean, it's just, another one of these, they just don't seem to want to I mean, it's been, God, we're going on almost a year and a half. So at what point, what's that trigger? Because, you read these comments and, you've got tenants there that they never stopped working during this, but they were able to take advantage of this loophole, keep on working, not pay their landlord. I mean, it's just there's been so many of these programs that I don't think have been well thought through. We've beaten PPP to death on this show, but and sometimes it's like the rules are one thing at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 they're completely different. So I just think it's another just another ill-conceived plan, and they're kind of making it up on the fly, and it's just creating more exactly what they're trying not to do. It's just creating more anxiety and more unrest. Charlie, do you got an article for us this week?
Yeah. Well, speaking of ill-conceived plans, let's talk about one of the biggest ones that's been going on lately. In Yahoo Finance, there's an article called Robinhood has the worst debut ever for an IPO of its size. And so what this looks at is the stock trading app Robinhood that has been in the news quite a bit, as I'm sure you all know, about this entire GameStop stock issue. And so they've been doing some kind of controversial things, and they're just getting ready. They were just getting ready to go public leading up to all this. And so what this article does is it looks at how poorly did the IPO do on its first trading session in comparison to other IPOs that had happened at a similar scale. So it ranks it amongst the top 51 firms, which you could tell is cherry picking because it's picking 51 based on the fact that that's what happened to be the record. But basically, it looks at it and says, okay, well, on the first day that this IPO came out, it dropped 8.4% below what its slated IPO price was going to be. And it talks about some other similar events that have happened with other companies. But the interesting thing I found about it is that is really just like the takeaway I had from it is it felt like the IPO performance is somewhat meaningless, because what happened is that since that's happened, it's recovered plus some. It came out at 38, basically 38 was the dollars per share was the IPO price. And as of today, it's already back up to 56, even after having lost 8% in its opening session. And so it's just like, it seems like, well, they can do all this controversial stuff in the news leading up to it. They can come out, have a terrible first day, and then a week from now, everybody's moved on, forgotten about it, and it just is what it is. So I guess I just want to get your guys' take on, makes me call into question IPOs as a whole, and whether or not using that as a performance metric is even meaningful, or should we be looking at new stocks in an entirely different way? What do y'all think about that?
Well, it seems like a subtopic of the broader topic of is the public stock price of a company a performance metric either, right? At all in any, because you could ask that question both ways. Was the IPO value being really low, going down when it was first issued? Is that meaningful in terms of the actual value or the actual performance of the company? And as you framed it, Charlie, it's like, well, it makes you wonder because the subsequent stock price went back up. But you could ask the contrary question: is the subsequent higher stock price meaningful? Is that actually a measure of the performance of the company either? And my answer would be, in the short run, neither are probably good metrics. I think I would hope, and I think I still do subscribe to the overall theory that our capital markets are efficient over long periods of time. And so, things settle out over a period of time. But when you're looking over short periods of time, our stock prices, whether it's the IPO or it's an existing stock on the market, is not efficient at all. And that's what stock traders are banking on, that they can gamble with how various information, sentiment, and emotions in the market are going to cause stock price to be volatile and go up and down, and how they might capitalize off of that. So I'm avoiding your question from the standpoint of I don't have the sophistication in that game of stock trading in the inefficient part of the market to be able to speak to the difference between the inefficiency at the IPO time versus the inefficiency at the subsequent IPO time. But my answer is it's all inefficient. It's all not a great metric of performance or value, and you kind of have to wait for things to settle and look at what the stock price says about the value of the company over a much longer period of time.
It's funny. If you look at it's old school or old money Wall Street, they were none too happy with Robinhood a couple months ago. That whole game they played with GameStop. So maybe some of this is them just teaching them a lesson, because I don't know. I'm just one of these people that believe that there are very powerful influences on Wall Street that can make things happen. But, Ty, you bring up an interesting point talking about the efficiency of the stock market. And, I was just listening to a business show this morning, and I thought it was, you'd look at it and you'd say, wow, this stock market, that's making record highs. And it might ultimately prove that this is the efficient way to be. I mean, because they've basically made it to where the only place to get any real returns is the stock market. They're really, with the 0% interest rates, I mean, there's just so much stimulus that it's really kind of hard to get a gauge on the stock market. But history might tell us, hey, the efficient move was to stay in the stock market because of all that stimulus. Something that I thought was kind of interesting, one of the analysts went ahead and they said it's a tough time or a risky time to be a bear. And I'm thinking, well, as we head into August, and we know it generally happens in the stock market in August and September, a market that's making record highs with a couple of dark clouds on the horizon. I would say it's a little bit, maybe ultimately, if you're somebody that's looking out 6 months, you don't care what happens in the next 2 months. But I think you could see a big drop or two here in the next month or two if history repeats itself.
Yeah, I would just say, way to kind of tie things together. We were just talking about my woes of not wanting to invest as much in the residential real estate market, and your point that is the stock market the only place left, right? 0% interest rates and savings accounts and government takings in the residential real estate market. So yeah, it does. I would say from my vantage point, the stock market is looking a little more attractive this year.
And all right, you've got another article we can talk about that I think relates to the stock market too, don't you, Ty?
Yeah, I mean, actually, related to the public company, at least, there's a public company, and I'm going to grab my notes here. There was a public company called Sealed Air out of North Carolina with $5 billion of revenue. So this is a fairly big company. And when big companies like that, when they report their financials on the market, I know a lot of our listeners know this, but I'll give kind of a brief overview. When they report their financials for the public, they are governed by the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC here in the U.S. And one of the things that they have to do is they have to get an independent audit by an independent auditing firm, accounting firm. At the public company level, like a $5 billion company, there's really only a handful of firms in the world that are considered qualified to do audits at that level. It's not necessarily about the technical skills as much. The technical skills, of course, go with that qualification that I'm talking about, but it also has to do with just sheer capacity, a firm that has enough people in it to handle an audit of that size. And so, those firms are been called the Big Five, the Big Four. Well, I think they were called the Big Eight at one point. Jack can probably weigh in on some of this, but today one of those big firms is Ernst Young or E&Y, and the scandal, as you might call it here, is that E&Y is being slapped. E&Y partners are being slapped by the Securities Exchange Commission, along with the chief accounting officer at this public company, Sealed Air, because they together caused the audit relationship, the audit firm and company relationship, to violate the auditor independence rules. So the concept of the auditor independence rules is that your financial statement auditor should not be the one who prepares your financials, has any vested interest in your company, has any vested interest in your financials. They are independent both in appearance and in fact, so that they can give an opinion to the public. When the public pulls up the financial statements of that public company, They see the income statement, the balance sheet, the cash flow, all the different disclosures, the annual report, all that good stuff that you get in an annual report for a company. When they pull that up, not just the annual report, but also the quarterly reports, the idea is the public will get they'll get a report of assurance from the independent audit firm that says, hey, we've looked under the hood, we've looked at the financials of this company, we've conducted audit procedures, and we've concluded that what the company is presenting is fair in all material respects, that they're following proper accounting standards, and that we've can provide some assurance that this is fair. I mean, it's a very interesting concept, because an audit does not ensure there was no fraud. An audit does not ensure that there was no errors at all. It just ensures that it's supposed to ensure that the financials, more or less, for all material respects is the phrase we use, fairly represent the company. And auditor independence, the independence of the CPA accounting firm that performs that audit, provides that service, and provides that report to the public, is sacrosanct, right? It's considered extremely important to this whole process of our capital markets, that our investor community can rely on the financials that they get, not only because they're believing that the company executives are being honest and forthright with their disclosures, but that this independent audit was done. So that's the background of this concept of an independent audit. And when you're working at a company of this size, of this magnitude, you have the board of directors, of course, which represents the investors of the company. The board of directors then will have an audit committee, and the audit committee is a group of the board, usually a subset of the board, that is tasked with deciding who the audit firm would be. And you have to imagine, I didn't look, you can find out, it's a disclosure, I didn't look into this, but you have to imagine that the audit fees for a company of this size, 5 billion in revenue, the audit fees for that audit firm, you're talking millions and millions and millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars. I mean, you're talking maybe even, I don't know, maybe even I'm way off. Maybe it's even much more than that. Let me just say it's a lot of money, right? And so this is big business for everyone involved, the audit and the audit fees and everything that goes on there. And so the point of the audit committee and their whole selection process is that they want to select the best qualified and somebody who they believe will give the board and the investors kind of the unvarnished assurance that the financials that management produces are fair in all material respects, right? And so what happened in this particular case is that the SEC determined that the partners and the chief accounting officer, which would be the chief accounting officer, the name chief suggests that, I mean, the accounting officer in this company was elevated to the C-suite, right? And so the chief accounting officer would work under the direction of the board, potentially along with other executives of the company, as well as the CEO and so on. And so what's talked about is that the chief accounting officer and the partners at E&Y who were getting the bid or trying to bid for this work, for this audit work, they colluded somehow in order to provide those partners with E&Y inside information about the audit committee's discussions and intelligence about kind of how they were going about their selection process. And that then, of course, would give the E&Y presumably a leg up in getting selected, and they ultimately were selected as the auditor, and then perform the audit, and people are relying on it, and so that's why this is all considered big misconduct, right? And so what was interesting to me is that I wouldn't have thought off the top of my head, it wouldn't have occurred to me that the chief accounting officer kind of going out to lunch or whatever they did, I don't know what they did, maybe it was deeper than that, even sending a memo or sending information or whatever, just giving some inside information about how the accounting firm could best position themselves to get the job. That wouldn't have occurred to me off the top of my head of, oh, that's an independence violation. I get it now after thinking about it, and I can kind of throw in some more points of why I see now that it is an independence violation, but I thought I would pause there before I kind of put my thumb on the scale with that and just ask you guys, is it self-evident to you why this would be an independence violation, or anything else you want to throw in about this interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the first thing that came to mind as I was thinking about it, but like you said, the more I kind of gave it some thought, it does seem like it would make a lot of sense that if there is a lot of discussion happening that leads up between the parties, it's hard to believe that they would have good conflict or that they would be able to set those boundaries properly. And if this is the thing that's getting noticed, it's also raises the question of, well, what else, like you said, what else happened behind the scenes that we maybe didn't realize? And so I think that the whole purpose of an audit is really boils back down to trust. It's ultimately that people want to trust the numbers that are going into the financial statements. And I think when you start to get these little harbingers of perhaps there is some form of collusion or perhaps there's some form of just discussion going on behind the scenes, it feels, it calls the entire thing into question, which calls the value of the entire exercise into question. And so I can see why this would cause that kind of issue, but I also think it's a very subtle thing, and it would be difficult to well define what where that boundary is, because I can also imagine this happening without there being any ill intent behind it. I can imagine an innocent conversation in which two people are just discussing what might be used to select an auditor, and wasn't for the intent of winning the bid, but ultimately could lead to it. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting, and yeah, I could see why that would be a big issue potentially.
No, I think you're seeing a lot of these things. Like I know in the public sector, it's just the way it's like you say, you want to instill that trust, and it's a bad visual. Even in the public sector, they don't want you giving ball tickets. They don't want them picking up the tab for lunch. And I don't know. I haven't, I guess, been close enough to audit committees or the auditors to know if that's starting to spill over into the private sector as well, where they're starting to curb, hey, we've got floor seats for the basketball game and you're taking your time. Because those are the kind of things, over time that, it's got that undue influence. A lot of times in this case, you're kind of restricted. I think we're down to 4. It used to be 8. It's very hard for other firms smaller than them to even get clients of a certain size. There are some bigger regional firms that occasionally can pick off one of those, but there's not a whole lot of competition, and they do have the deep pockets. So, as people read these things and see what they perceive as undue influence, that's why I think they need to step in and stop them and make it seem like it's independent, and at least, to everybody looking at it from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think you guys hit it right on the head. And I think just to drive that home, what, it comes down to the chief accounting officer, right? I mean, him and his team essentially, or her and her team. I don't know if it was a him or her. Oh, well, actually I do, because I read the article. It was a him. So the chief accounting officer and their team, right, they prepare the financial statements, right? So they're the ones essentially getting audited. So if they're helping the audit committee from the board, or if they're using inside information that comes from the audit committee to put their finger on the scale as to which auditor gets selected, they're basically picking their own, who's going to audit themselves. That is exactly the nature of an independence problem, right? And so yeah, I think it's something to consider, and just a reminder for everyone out there, kind of how our system is supposed to work, even though it often breaks down in many different ways. Here's an example of the SEC standing up to try to make it work the way it's supposed to work. Pitch it over to Jack.
Yeah, interesting one. So it was the same nations taking every medal at the Olympics. Well, it seems like now there's more, fewer powerhouses and more parity. There's more nations than ever before, record number of winning medals. And I think this is really kind of cool, because, I remember being a little kid and looking at the newspaper, and it was always between the Russians and the U.S. to see who'd get the most number of medals. Now they're saying like Great Britain, China, United States. I mean, a lot of the people that normally win a lot of medals still are winning a lot of medals. But I think this is really kind of cool, because I was reading an article on somebody who'd won a gold medal from I can't remember what the country was, but it was reading what the honor that country was going to bestow on her. I want to say that it was a house or something like that, something that was life altering, changing, because she was bringing a gold medal back to that country. And I think that's really kind of the spirit of the Olympics and why they were started in the first place, a chance to just cut all the BS, drop everything and just, get all these nations competing on on an athletic basis. And I think it's kind of cool that some of these smaller countries have, really put their backing behind certain athletes in certain events, and really they become kind of national heroes, kind of looking at it, what has been in this nation. I mean, I also remember, at the same time I was probably looking at the newspaper to see those medals, we had an athlete called Bruce Jenner who was on the Wheaties box. Well, we all know that that's now Caitlyn Jenner. So I guess things have changed from then to back to now. I mean, you just, some of the shenanigans that go on at the games, but I'm really kind of enjoying the fact that some of these smaller countries are really embracing the competition and putting the resources behind these people to help them succeed. And it's just, I don't think there's few things in sports that are more gratifying or enjoyable to see than somebody winning that gold medal and being so proud, and then a nation being proud behind them.
Yeah, let me say thanks for bringing some positivity to the articles. It's so much of what we talk about is something scandalous, and I was looking for the scandal in this, and I couldn't find it. I mean, it seems like good, like you said, good news, right? More countries being represented, and it's the medal podium or the medals being handed out are not all concentrated to just a couple or a few countries. And I can't think of anything and couldn't see anything in the article that suggested that this was not a good thing. So happy to hear it.
No, I think it's great. I mean, the more that we see globalization with everything, so things get cheaper as they're made in different places and whatnot. And I think that you see that same thing even happening in the Olympics, to where maybe training methods or ability or ways of doing things have been shared in a more wide context, so other countries are able to utilize these things. And I think that at the end of the day, the way that the Olympics could be the most entertaining, at least to me as a spectator, is if you do have that wide variety of countries winning, especially in events that maybe they didn't have a historical, haven't always been winning, basically. I think that's probably what makes it the most interesting to me as a spectator. I know the article talked about India being big into, I'm going to forget exactly which one it was. It was field soccer, I believe, or field hockey. That's what it was. It was field hockey, and they had been historically a powerhouse in that. And then in the 80s, they apparently stopped being that, and then now they're kind of coming back around to having won again. And so I just think seeing those kind of arcs is, the most interesting that the Olympics can be from my perspective.
I think the sad thing is, unfortunately, the ratings are probably lower than they've ever been, but I mean, it's just if they would stay focused on just this, what we're talking, this robust competition and these, fantastic venues that they hold the Olympics in, they'd probably do a whole lot better. And like I say, the competition, I think, kind of sells itself. There's nothing like watching an exciting event, even the upset, and like I say, seeing some of these small countries make it big. Charlie, you have an article to take us home today?
Yeah, I've got another one we could talk about from livescience.com. It's a little bit outside of the scope of our normal business articles, but I thought we could maybe bring it back in. So it looks like China is going to activate the world's first clean nuclear reactor in September. Apparently, Chinese government scientists, they've got these plans for a first of its kind experimental nuclear reactor that doesn't use water for cooling. Instead, it's a molten salt nuclear reactor, and it runs on liquid thorium instead of uranium. It's supposed to be safer because the molten salt is a better solidifier and holds in potential radiation of leaks than the prior materials they've been using. And so, and then because it doesn't require water, it can also be ran in the desert. And so they're looking to put this in a bunch of places that it may have been hard to put the prior type of reactors. One of the things I thought was interesting in the article is it talks about how China is working with other countries, up to 70 other countries, as part of a big initiative they call the Belt and Road Initiative, in which they're going to invest in the infrastructure of all of these other countries. And so in order to make things like this more possible. And so I guess I want to get your guys' take on, part of me looks at that with a little bit of skepticism and says, is China truly trying to invest in the infrastructure of 70 other countries for the best of what's best for those countries? Or is it perhaps part of a bigger question or a bigger plan to make use of something they otherwise wouldn't have been able to utilize? like another country's deserts, or maybe even just goodwill and trade relations, for example. And so, yeah, I just want to get your guys' take on it. I guess, will this be the new big thing of the future in nuclear technology? And then is this Belt and Road Initiative as altruistic as it may appear, or is it maybe something else altogether?
I mean, I feel a little bit skeptical of this whole thing. China's not really known for being an innovative leader of technology, or like coming up with new things and deploying it engineering wise. They're known for being good at replicating technology. But I didn't read deeply into the story on this. Perhaps it makes me wonder, because typically their move is with something like this is it's not really their technology. Like, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that they may be the first deploying it, but the technology is actually developed and being installed by somewhere else. I mean, I guess I'm asking that in a hopeful way, because they just don't have a really good track record of of engineering things well after the Great Wall, that is.
The article didn't clarify either way. I got the feeling that it made it sound like something that they were making in-house, because it talked about Chinese government scientists being behind it, but that's pretty vague and could be not the full story.
Yeah. So have we heard of Chinovac or Sinovac? I mean, the Chinese version of the vaccine was so terrible that they the wealthy in China are getting Pfizer, right? So it's that part of it's kind of scares me, right? China's developing its own nuclear reactor technology. I mean, that should be a scary headline, actually, in my opinion. But I guess, this could turn the corner if it turns out to be true that it's the first clean nuclear reactor, and it is an innovative technology. That maybe this becomes the hallmark moment where they actually do something that is inventive or innovative on their own and lead the world. And then I think, to your other question, Charlie, if they do pull that off, that's what they try to do with the Sinovac. They tried to rush to market their own version of the vaccine and then get it around to the countries of the world that they knew that the Western world was not going to do that with, as a form of diplomacy, essentially. And so, but it backfired because the Sinovac doesn't actually work well. So, I mean, I could see a similar thing happening here. If these clean nuclear reactors aren't so clean or don't actually work all that well, then, getting this out and then trying to install it in a bunch of other countries as a form of diplomacy could actually not work well for them. So, yeah, I don't know if I should be rooting for them to fail on this, or what that could mean from a world disaster kind of standpoint. So I'll just leave it at that.
I think it's a pretty safe assumption that China doesn't do anything that's not good for. Well, I mean, you could probably say that of anybody, but they don't exactly have a track record of being altruistic. So, it's an interesting thing too, is that when now we know their track record with things escaping labs in China. So I'm a little bit more nervous when they're trying out new nuclear. I mean, I think it's a great thing, right? It's progress in the nuclear field that we probably have any progress since they were first developed. So, I mean, I think it's it's good. I mean, the other thing may be, to your point, Ty, they may have stolen this technology, but they're the only one with the big enough and bad enough to actually deploy it to many nations. But yeah, I mean, the jury's still out on this one. Couple things that would make me pause. Their track record on rolling things out is not exactly the greatest. So yeah, too early to tell if this is going to be a good or a bad thing. I obviously you'd love to see this type of progression and improvement in handling in nuclear reactors, but again, it would be contrary to what we've seen in recent history.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it seems weird to be so early in the phases of something and then wanting to deploy it so thoroughly across all of these other countries as well. I mean, if you're just looking at it as just China testing this new technology, you would think they would want to have it be pervasive in their country before putting it in all of these other places. And so just kind of, seemed like it could be a bit of a question mark there. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for us here at the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please leave a comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And please check out our sister podcast, Profitless on Purpose, where they're discussing anything and everything relating to the nonprofit space. Again, thanks. Bye, everybody.